Hey everyone, welcome to Handing the Shame Back, a channel dedicated to survivors of child sexual abuse everywhere. And we are everywhere. I've got an amazing survivor today, but before I bring him back, and this is part two of our fantastic interview, please know there's a trigger warning. Of course, the content is on child sexual abuse, so if you feel triggered, go to the show notes below and you'll be directed to some resource and support. So just a quick recap. Frank Rogers comes to us from Claremont, California. He's a survivor, he's a teacher, he's an author. He experienced child sexual abuse for many, many years, beginning with his mother. His grandfather got involved whenever he could, such was the predator nature he had. And then he had a priest at the age of 7 who decided to play sex games with him. Listening to Frank, I think there's much that can be learned. How he managed to turn this around is what we're going to delve into now. So stay put, you don't want to miss this. Frank, part two. Ta-da!
Hi, Gloria. Great to be back. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, so we kind of looked at impact, and thank you, very, very well put. I guess we're now looking at what helped you through once you recognised the horror of what had happened to you? What helped you through?
Yeah, well, first of all, it was a long journey, right? I mean, it was a very long, really couple decades journey ultimately of recovery from this. Part of my journey was coming to terms with this is what really did happen to me. I mean, because I had repressed the memories for so long. I mean, I was really 30 when the memories started to come, and really believing them and trusting them. All the while, my mom insisting, "Oh, I would never do anything to you. I would never sexually abuse you, ever, never, never," to the point where I had to actually separate myself from her and say, "Mom, I need space," and I went almost a 10-year period where I did not even relate with her because I had to give myself to my own recovery. It was just too crazy making. So that was a long, long journey. And then also, um, I was just so ashamed that I repressed all of this stuff. I didn't let anybody know that I was even thinking these things or feeling these feelings, and would put on this facade, this persona of being, a functioning adult and successful in my work. I was a professor. I got a PhD. I was teaching. I was speaking. All putting on this persona of being, this articulate storytelling academic, where inside, I mean, I would let nobody see any of the crap that I would, go to bed each night wanting to kill myself and imagining how, and all the rages and nightmares and, fantasies and hallucination, all of it completely secret. So I was like living a double life, and trying to find a way to integrate that was huge for me. But in terms of what helped, I mean, it was a number of things that helped. One, I mean, getting really good therapy was gigantic, and I mean, I just do not know how it's possible to navigate recovery from child sexual abuse without trauma therapists, people who really kind of know the terrain. And I had a series of outstanding therapists. One in particular I saw for like 12 years, who was just enormously helpful guy. But along that journey, there's a few things. I mean, one was watching shows like this. I mean, we didn't have podcasts back in the day. This was in the 90s. But I got to the point where I was reading every account I could of sexual abuse, read Courage to Heal and Victims No Longer by Mike Lew, and watching movies, and for me, that was incredibly validating. It wasn't a wallowing. It was like, oh my God, thank goodness somebody is naming this. It's in the world. I'm not making it up. It's a real thing. And I felt, paradoxically validated by and encouraged and understood by these accounts. That was an enormously helpful piece of my recovery.
So, can you tell us a little more about that? Because I love the fact that you've compared it with almost the opposite, which is denial. No, that doesn't happen. No, it's not as prolific as what we think. No, it must all be in your head, she said. Tell us a little bit more about that absolute incredible validation through hearing about other people and recognizing that, oh, I'm not alone.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I remember the first time I read Mike Lew, his book Victims No Longer, which was, the only book on sexual abuse of boys that I was aware of back in the early 90s, and weeping. I mean, and not only the stories, but just the list of symptoms. Like, these are the kinds of things that might happen to you. You might have nightmares. You might recoil at being touched. You might think of yourself as shameful. Just on down the list. You might have despair. You might be having thoughts of suicide. You might have images of sex of acts that just invade your sleep or invade your conscious day. And I remember reading that and just weeping, because it was like, oh my God, you mean this is really a thing? I thought I was experiencing all these things because I was just bad, that I was just soiled, I was perverted, I was deranged, I was psychotic. It was like, no, my God, there's a reason for all this stuff. There's an actual phenomenon of sexual abuse. So I felt so affirmed, so validated. Like, it's not just some crazy thing inside of me. That was huge for me. That was just so huge.
Oh, and just as I'm hearing you and I'm thinking about our wonderful survivors, hey team, who also get the opposite of that happen. You see, we have this thing called Darvode, Frank. So be interested to know what you think. We're denied, we're attacked, our credibility or our state of mind or how we see the world. Black sheep is often a label given to us. We're the reverse then of the order of victim and offender. Very clever. How
Yeah.
could you say that? He would never do that. So, all of that. So to hear you say that and know that for us as survivors, it's just like a gift. It's not that we want to relive the horror, but it just, I think you said it validates, kind of not normalizes, I guess, but has us feel less alone. We are
Yeah.
not alone in this. We are not crazy. And yeah. So look, Frank, what are you what are you doing now with this? And I know the trauma therapists helped you, and I'm so glad you had them. What have you done now with your life in terms of being able to integrate, because integrate's a big word too,
Yeah.
but in terms of being able to integrate this history of yours into your life and be the amazing person you are today?
Yeah, well, I really, I'd say two things. One, I mean, I kind of consider my adult vocation as being like a psycho-spiritual quest to find healing and recovery. And so I studied and tried every form of therapy, every spiritual practice, every support group that you could imagine, to see what worked it for me and what didn't. I mean, it was a life or death quest for me, but it was one, I'm a professor, that I integrated into my teaching, so that I began now teaching compassion-based ways of healing, of self-restoration, of emotional regulation when you get dysregulated. That became my life's work. So I teach courses on psycho-spiritual resources for the healing of trauma and contemplative practices and whatnot. And then the second thing, which I only did recently after my sister took her life, was I decided to tell my story. And so I wrote a book that it's both the memoir of what happened to me, telling my survivor's story, but it also chronicles in detail what I've discovered to find recovery and healing and wholeness. And so telling that story, writing it as a book, kind of going through both to kind of metabolize the trauma that was still lingering, but also to discern out of that how we might actually help others to find healing and wholeness in the midst of that. That became a survivor's project, a survivor's mission that gave me enormous meaning and really did integrate this stuff. And so I told the whole story and then even synthesized at the end, these were kind of 10 things that were my primary coordinates in being able to heal and recover from sexual trauma. So
Yeah.
that's been enormous in my healing journey.
Well, and what I love about that is we know, and survivors watching will get this too. When we release it from our head, there's something quite powerful about that, because it can sit there. And I'm sure, Frank, that in the writing of this, things that perhaps hadn't quite clicked into place click into place.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah,
and the
absolutely.
awareness and the insight and the knowledge and just the releasing is also a form of vindication.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the memoir I just wrote this year is actually my second piece. I wrote a novel about 10 years ago that was a fictionalized version. I wasn't yet ready to tell my story that it was me, but I wrote a novel about, a person who struggled with child sexual abuse and was working with a child who was abused and kind of the journey that happens between them. And you're right, there's something about writing. It's something about taking our experience and crafting it into art that is itself healing. For me, it was writing. It might be sculpture, it might be painting, it might be music, it might be poetry, but being able to take our experience and give expression to it, and mold it and shape it with purpose is part of the healing journey. And in doing that, I mean, in writing that novel, some of my memories came back to me in the writing of it. It's like, gosh, here's this predator priest, who's one of the characters, and I just know he's part of the story. And it was like, oh my God, I know why he's part of the story. I'd totally forgotten about this, and it kind of comes back. So there is something in the artistic process or the writing process, the journaling process that is metabolizing and integrating and brings pieces of our story into new insight. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I think, I guess in a way too, because we're survivors, so we're used to trauma, is we can also get a little bit triggered or a little bit blindsided in what does come out and be made sense of in the release of the information. So
Yeah.
I guess too, I'm wondering, you've talked about trauma therapists, you've talked about the writing and in terms of that, the integrating. And survivors, by integrating, we're really looking at what happened to you, what during that awful traumatic period in your life, and the adult you are today, and how we integrate that into being the beautiful souls that we are. And yes, you are beautiful souls. So, Frank, what advice would you give or would you offer to survivors who may be watching this and thinking, gosh, I can relate?
Yeah, well, a couple things kind of stand out for me. One is surrounding yourself with people like you. I mean, people who will look at you and unequivocally say, "I believe you. What you are feeling or thinking or experiencing is there for a reason. I understand. It should never have happened. It was awful, and you are not alone. There is support to help you walk through." Whether that be a therapist, a podcast narrator, or whether it be a good friend, a confidant, a teacher, a spiritual director, surrounding ourselves with people like that is huge. And the second thing I'll say is for me, which was a huge game changer in my own recovery. I was plagued by rage. I mean, rage at my mom. I mean, rage that would just ignite, if somebody comes in front of me in the traffic or whatever, self-loathing we talked about, despair. And I would think there's something so wrong with me for the things that I'm feeling. And I would try to fight my feelings. I would try to fight my body. My body's feeling violated. God, there's something wrong with my body. I got to, stop feeling that. I got to stop thinking that. And I would try to fight all the things, the ways my body was being activated. And the game changer for me was when I learned that all of the ways our bodies respond, our emotions, they are there for a reason. We're not making it up. It's not because we're crazy. It's not because we're bad. There is a reason for the rage. There's a reason for the self-loathing. There's a reason for the shame. And if we can learn to be able, I call it like take the U-turn, and kind of look at ourselves and be able to have curiosity and even compassion for the rage that I'm feeling and what's underneath it, for the shame that I'm feeling, for the self-loathing. That is a source of healing and validation that is profoundly restorative. So finding practices, finding therapists that can help us really honor our experience instead of doubting it or judging it or fighting it, and really find compassion, self-compassionate ways of being able to tend to our inner worlds and heal the young children within us that are still imprisoned in the traumatic memories, to be able to give them the care that they need so that that energy could be released from our bodies and our psyches. That changes everything.
I so love the way that you've done that, and I'm sure you've realized this, but taking the U-turn leads you back to you,
Yeah,
which I I love that.
exactly.
But
Exactly.
it equally brings me to the body never forgets.
Exactly.
So if your body is showing you that it needs to express rage or express sadness or just go within and just be quiet and almost hermitish, there's a reason for all of it. And I love, Frank, that you've said all of that, because what it does is it gives permission for anything you feel is exactly how you need to in that moment.
Exactly. It's the absolutely appropriate response to what happened to us.
Yeah. So I have a question, if I may, about your mum. She, I'm not sure, and I would be helpful to understand. Do you think your mum had repressed or suppressed all of that that she had done to you, or do you believe she was just in denial and minimizing it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a great question. This is part of the journey I describe. So for my mom, eventually we got to the point where after enough therapeutic work, I needed to address what kind of a relationship I really could have with my mom. And so with my therapist, we invited her to a therapy session. And she really wanted to be reconnected. Like I said, it was like 10 years. And in that session, she came in saying, look, I never sexually abused Frank. There is no way. I would never be that kind of a person. I'd never be that kind of mom. And I had the therapist was enormously skilled. But and what he basically what emerged from that is that my mom, when she thought about sexual abuse, she thought about what her predator stepfather had done to her. She thought of somebody who raped, who violated, who beat, who was malicious. I mean, who was venomous, and hoarded, paraded them around. I mean, that's what she had in her head around sexual abuse. And my therapist was, tell me a little bit about what happened to you and what it felt like. And she, didn't want to talk a lot about it, but she said, I felt like I was absolutely used. I never felt like a man in my world, in my whole life, ever treated me as anything but an object, as a sex object, and I was used for their pleasure and discarded, at their whims. And that must have sounded horrible. She said, well, let Frank tell you what he was experiencing. And what it dawned on me in the course of this was, Mom, when you hear the word sexual abuse, you think of what Harold did. You didn't do that to me. Absolutely not. You absolutely did not do that. You are right about that. But what you did to me, constantly sleeping with me, naked, touching my body, never giving me agency over what can be touched and what could be kissed. I felt like I was an object. I felt like I was your plaything. I felt like I was there to give you pleasure. And you had no idea that I was getting no pleasure at all. And over the course of the exchange, it started to dawn on her, and all of us, she went, oh my God, are you saying that you felt towards me the way I felt towards Harold? I said, yes, Mom. And she broke down sobbing, just sobbing, partly out of the shame, partly out of remorse, and partly out of, she had no idea. And this was part of the narcissism. It just didn't occur to her how it would be impacting me, but she had no idea how it felt like to me. And so in her sob, she's going, yes, I did all those things, but I thought you liked it. I thought I just wanted to be close with you. I just wanted to be close. I just wanted to be loved. That's why I did those things.
Yeah.
And that was an enormous validation, because she finally got what her impact was on me in a way she never could have seen before.
And it's quite powerful how you've described that, actually, Frank, because we can be forgiven for thinking that when you're being sexually abused, it's with intent, and it's with really malicious evil. But actually, for her, it didn't necessarily feel like that to her. To her,
Right.
it felt quite different. It doesn't, however, make it right, and that is why one of my questions to you earlier was, how did it leave you feeling? Because as children, our instinct never lies, and you've described it now as an adult, taking the U-turn. As children, what we learned to do was, don't trust your instinct, because you don't
Exactly.
have the power to do anything with it.
Exactly. And so
So,
when we can trust our instincts, trust our feelings, trust what our body is
yeah.
saying. Yeah.
So look, we need to close, but is there anything else you would like to add before we finish up today?
Well, I just want to express gratitude, and what you're doing is huge for us, all of us who are survivors, like you are as well. That to create a space where we could be validated, that our experience could be honored, and where we could be treated with agency and dignity, and learning to tend to our limits. When we need to take a break, and when we can hear these stories. I mean, just the spirit with which you do that is enormously healing and even sacred, as far as I'm concerned. So deep gratitude, and to our survivors out there, yeah, finding spaces like this. These are the containers where true, genuine healing can happen. So absolutely.
That's so beautiful. Please stay there, Frank. Otherwise I'll hunt you down. So survivors, what a gift, and so much of what Frank has said resonates, and there's always so many different takeaways, aren't there? And there's a couple I want to share. So, that whole thing around validation, when Frank described it earlier, it doesn't actually matter in what form. It could be a book, it could be someone's memoir, it could be a podcast, it could be a movie. Scouts Honour's just come out on Netflix, by the way. But there's many different formats or versions of survivors emerging now throughout the world. And I think having that as validation for us is almost the opposite of the Darvine we all experienced. So I think that's really powerful. I think the fact that, Frank was able to talk about when you're feeling a strong emotion like rage or powerlessness, or, without even understanding why, taking that U-turn and Frank, I am going to steal that now. The you turn back into you, because there's a reason for everything. So, survivors, I hope you've got as much from this as I have today, and this is the end of part 2. And as always, I see you, I stand beside you, and I believe you.